Hey, so gonna grind Hearthstone until I notice some of you saying hi. It did happen to me once or twice that someone said hi. I usually react like in 5 or 10 minutes, and that's way too long for a streamer. But I'm looking forward to actually getting it right at some point. Probably, maybe. Anyway, Alex O'Connor, cool philosophy streamer, and emphasis on cool. I'm not sure whether he's. I can't vouch for the personality, but he seems cool.
Alex O'Connor, welcome to the show.
How splendidly we progress. The first time on a Skype call, second time was in person in Austin, and now something of a sort of cinematic production. I fear that next time we'll be in 3D or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well, mate. How are you feeling in the aftermath of Peter Hitchens?
Validated, vindicated. I must say that I was a little bit... I was in two minds about uploading that interview. He does... There was a bit of a mixture of opinion coming from him. He wasn't speaking entirely clearly. It must have been something on his mind. He said, as he's getting up to walk out, I don't think you should run this. And I'm thinking, look, if my guest tells me that they don't want me to run an interview for any reason, it could be because they've had a bad hair day, then I'll respect that. And so I thought, damn, am I really going to have to, be the bigger man here and just not post this at all? But then he kept saying, oh, run it if you like. Yeah, I can't stop you from running it. I just don't think you have any moral right to run it. And I asked him why. And he said it was because I am a propagandist for drug decriminalization, a subject which prior to that, by the way, I'd spoken about once, ever. And that I'd intentionally tricked him to appear on my podcast in order that I might fool him into a conversation about drugs. Now, before the podcast started, I said, Mr. Hitchens, you have about 3 subject areas that we both talk about where I think there's a bit of crossover that you've either spoken about or indeed written books about. And those are the decriminalization of drugs. I also mentioned this in my email. The existence of God, or religion, I should say. God and religion is the topic. And the third was monarchy. At this point, he says, well, monarchy is a bit boring. Okay, notice, listener, that he did not take this opportunity to tell me that he thought that drugs were a bit boring and would rather not really talk about drugs at all or for too long. Okay, fine. So I'm thinking, I agree with you. The monarchy is incredibly boring. In fact, that's the entirety of my point about the monarchy, is that it's essentially just boring more than anything else. So let's just do the other 2. So I say we'll run for about an hour, ideally. He says, that's good, And I say, but, if the conversation flows, it can be an hour and a half. It could be 2 hours. And okay, he says, well, look, I say sometimes they can be 3 hours long. He says, well, 3 hours might be a bit long, but we'll see how we do. So I'm thinking about an hour and a half. An hour and a half on what was now, in my view, 2 subjects. So at about 40 minutes into this potentially 90-minute podcast on the same topic, when he told me that we'd been going around for too long on said topic, I was a little bit bemused. But I did think to myself, maybe I've done something wrong here. Maybe I have upset him in a way that obviously was not intentional. I wasn't trying to bring this out of him, although, it does do quite well for the channel. It's not like it's something I would do intentionally. So I did think to myself, well, maybe I've done something. So I listened back and I sent it to some friends, including you, and thank you for listening to it, and saying that, most people just said, you have to run this. He's been completely unreasonable. And so there have been criticisms. People have said, well, you know what, it was a bit boring. Or, yeah, it was going around in circles. I submit that was his fault, by the way, because he does this thing which I've noticed in a lot of philosophical and political discussion, which is the sort of I know this one attitude. When you do a lot of interviews, I find that you have a sort of I know this one. And so
they answer the question that they heard, not the answer that was asked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it happens especially when it's easy enough to make that mistake if you're not listening carefully. So he was talking about I asked him about the decriminalization of cannabis, and he says that, well, this will essentially mean that a lot of more children will be smoking it. He had this contention that children would end up smoking cannabis. And I thought to myself, well, okay, I can understand that concern, of course, but I think the tobacco industry has suffered quite a blow in still being perfectly legal to buy as an adult, but kids just aren't smoking cigarettes anymore. It's just not a thing that's really done. Why is that? In other words, we've had quite a successful education campaign whereby it's not popular for kids to smoke anymore, and yet it's still perfectly legal. Can't we have a similar approach to cannabis? Potentially, by the way, not a good view. Potentially a perfectly rebuttable view. I'm not sure. But I wouldn't know because I didn't get a rebuttal to that view. Instead, I just heard, all you can do is do the whole, which, by the way, is a genuinely quite tired line in this debate, the whole, oh, what about smoking? Or indeed another point where I brought up alcohol. Well, all you can say is, what about alcohol? What about smoking? And that's not what I was doing. At least I contend that's not what I was doing. Because that's what he heard. He goes, oh, I know this one. I've heard this before. Yeah, and you haven't read my book. It didn't seem to occur to him that it is possible, Mr. Hitchens, to read your book and yet still, after having done so, disagree with you.
Damn it, I had lethal. I did
Sometimes
not
when
see.
you hear people speak, especially guys that are a little bit older, I think there
Maybe I
is
didn't.
there is kind of like reverse ageism that goes on,
5,
which is who is this sort of young
1, 2,
whippersnapper
3,
person who I maybe have heard of or haven't heard of much.
5, 6. Yeah, I had
almost
lethal.
like a
Yeah.
blasé kind of discrediting of the thing. It's like this is.
Or I
this is your
didn't
show,
because
this
I
is my
played
show,
this.
so to
Yeah, I
speak.
did not
And,
have lethal.
Yeah, it was like
okay, cool.
I thought his attitude was pompous and unlikable, and my favorite part was when he threw the pillow at the microphone.
Throwing the pillow down, and he kept sort of walking back over. He says, I don't want you to post this, and yet,
Obsessed with
and yet
drugs.
walk
I had
back
no
over to the
opinion about you
microphone.
before.
Yeah.
I've decided that I absolutely do not like you.
It was quite something, and a lot of people messaged me saying, "Hey, like, I'm so sorry that happened. Like, you doing all right?" And I'm thinking, sorry. I thought there's no way that this is happening. I mean, when it looked like he was about to get up, I thought, surely not.
Not
But then internally, I'm thinking, like, go on then,
Go on
do
then.
it,
Yeah.
do it, because I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
think I've done anything wrong here.
It was the podcasting equivalent of "Come on, mate, have a go."
Yeah, but you know what the weirdest thing was, because he sort of gets up to go, and he walks out.
Is
and
he
stands at the
is he
door,
not admitting
and
to
it's-
this
I wish
being
you could
prime
have seen his
content?
body
A
language. It
content
was
like
very
this
there's one point where you can
is
see it when he
very
walks
good
back into shot
content.
and he says something.
Does he not
And then after he said it, he just
admit
sort of stands
that
there,
like ever?
looking at me, as if to say, like, what have you got?
Have a go.
And so he'd keep going, like, I'm going to go now.
That he's
I'm going.
doing this
I'm-
for
I'm-
selfish
I'm gonna- I'm
reasons,
going,
for
and
good
waiting.
content,
Podcast
at
playing
least in
hard to get
part.
equivalent.
Probably
It
is.
must have been something like that. Yeah, it was like the person who wants the fight but wants to look like they didn't initiate the fight.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I don't think it's my fault. I'll leave it up to the judgment of the listener or the viewer. I don't think it's my fault that he spent 17 minutes, 17, count them, 17 entire minutes, stood at the door telling me how much he personally dislikes me, telling me how much he doesn't want to see me again.
I've wanted to do that for as long as I've known you. So
Well, we'll see how we do.
yeah, today you're going to try and convince me of the existence of God. Today, you managed to convince ChatGPT,
That's right.
which means, does it mean that I'm smarter than ChatGPT if you convince me more quickly or more slowly, or not at all?
I don't know. I do know that it means that, well, ChatGPT, if it's going to inherit eternal life, I sort of wonder how that's going to work in heaven. I don't know. I mean, I don't know
Just
if
this
I've made it.
recursive nightmare for everyone as they walk around and they've got the ChatGPT logo floating about.
Yeah, the interesting thing about ChatGPT is that you sort of you can essentially convince it of anything. And so I
Right.
wasn't quite sure if it was even a very good video idea, because I'm sure I could just as easily convince it that God doesn't exist.
Well, at least you can be thankful that it wasn't able to say it had no opinion of you before, but it absolutely does not like you, and then get up and walk out.
Quite right. Some people in the comments did say that at least, ChatGPT stuck around until the end. That would be a task. In fact, that's another video idea. I got ChatGPT to storm out of an interview. Even I probably couldn't do that.
Didn't this get brought up? You debated
Even
Ben Shapiro
I. Bit of
yesterday.
a
How did that
narcissist,
go? I haven't even
isn't
seen
it?
you.
A
It
bit.
went well. I think it will probably be out around the time of this interview, maybe slightly before, slightly afterwards. It was a good conversation. We were discussing whether or not religion is good for society.
Tough
And
stance for young Benjamin to take at the moment.
I suppose so. I mean, it was a very much sort of don't mention the war type scenario. I mean, the producers had said, look, we want this to be an evergreen conversation. We want this to be something that people can listen to at any point.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Ben had just the night before been to the Oxford Union, and I haven't seen that yet either.
I
But
have.
it
I
sounds
saw that
like
he had at it with a bunch of people on the other side of the fence,
Yeah.
so to speak.
he didn't have a very good time. He said to me that it was the most tense thing that he's ever done. the most tense thing he's ever been a part of.
Well, I saw something that was kind of interesting was the video was only shot on what appeared to be iPhone.
Yes.
So there was no... Maybe they just wanted to get it up early as opposed to
Yeah, this
waiting
time
for the
we'll
Oxford Union's
calculate,
official video to come through.
Seems to be the
6
case. They
plus
do
4,
seem to be
10,
planning to upload it.
4,
In fact, when I was recording with
14,
Ben, I
one
think his
off.
team were in the green room sort of furiously
maybe with
subtitling
this.
to try and get it out, potentially before the Oxford Union does.
Right, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, it sounded like a hell of an evening. And so the next day, he was saying that it sort of felt like a nice break from that.
What, to sit opposite you?
Well,
that you are the comfortable leather
I'm
pair
still
of
doing
shoes
this.
that he can put on.
I think Ben relaxes in argumentation. I think he genuinely enjoys it. I think there's no contradiction to say that he was having some time off by sitting there and having a
Playing
spat.
with you.
But he was having a break from the politics.
Right.
In other words, he was able to just argue about something a bit more perennial and a little less fiery, I suppose.
What have you learned? So you are... I've been a massive fan of you since before you came on the podcast, and since then we've become friends, and you've come out to see me in Austin. We spent a ton of time together. You're probably my favorite person to watch debate people, because it's kind of a little bit like watching Batman versus Spider-Man or something, because I know you well, and we've argued a lot, but I know maybe Ben Shapiro, but I don't know what will happen when these two people come together. You were president of Sock.
The Socratic Society, yes.
Yeah, you were part of Debate Sock and all of this other stuff at Oxford. Given that you've got a relatively illustrious heritage of both formal and informal debates, what is your assessment of Ben Shapiro's debating style, his ethical consistency, his ability to deploy logic, etc., now that you've gone mano a mano in the ring?
Well, he has obviously an incredibly high verbal IQ. He can construct a sentence out of nowhere and do it very quickly. And he's also very difficult to interrupt. Not that I particularly wanted to. I mean, he would throw sort of maybe 2 or 3 points out at once, and you want to butt in and do them one by one. You don't want to be rude, of course, so I let him finish. But it was amazing how they just glued together into one wall of text. You know, I've seen comments on some of the videos that I was watching of him in preparation to talk to him, where people were not being funny in saying that they play the video on 0.75 speed because it makes him sound normal. There was sort of an episode with Constantine and Francis, trigonometry, and he's talking about religion and its relation to the fentanyl crisis. And
playing
people
against
were
a
saying
meme
that
deck.
and it was very fast. And if you play it on 0.75,
This doesn't bode well.
you forget that you've done that, and you're just hearing somebody talk at a normal volume, at a normal speed, and then Constantine comes in sounding like a blue whale or something out of nowhere. So he's very quick.
Yeah.
But also, I thought, very charitable. This is the thing. I think people get Ben Shapiro wrong. I went to his Cambridge Union event after this discussion / debate, because it was in Cambridge. That's why we were out there, and so I went to this event, and I was talking to a lot of the students afterwards. And you hear a lot of people saying about Ben Shapiro that he's a bit of a grifter, or well, I'm not really a fan. Or you have the sort of secret fans who are sat in the chamber going like, well, you know, I think it's important. You know, if you're going to disagree with someone, you sort of have to hear the thing that you're going to disagree with in the flesh. And it's like, so you can say that you like Ben Shapiro. It's okay, you know. But people see this side of him, of the sort of slightly sneering, smarmy, owning the college student kind of thing. But I think in many ways he matches the energy that he's given. And so taking him seriously and listening to what he's saying and being willing to concede a point to him, he will do the same thing. And I think that happened in this conversation. You know, it's steadfast. We're saying what we think to each other. At one point, we both accuse each other simultaneously of being delusional, but in such a manner that if you say something, you get a sort of like, yeah, no, that's a fair point, actually. Maybe we should put it this way instead. Or yeah, you know, actually, I see what you're saying. No, you're right. I should have said this instead. That kind of attitude, which is the kind of thing that people think Ben Shapiro is incapable of for some reason.
Humility.
You know what I mean? Yeah, and it's a kind of, it's a hidden humility, because it comes out not in the attitude, not in a sort of, he's not going to like give way to you emotionally. He's not going to be like, oh, you're right. It would just be if you pay attention to the way he's constructing an argument and changing it subtly based on your responses, you know that he really is listening and really is trying to engage with what you're actually saying. And that's the kind of humility that I don't think can really be faked.
Yeah, I am friends with a bunch of guys that have worked with him over the years, and I know for a fine fact that part of his debate prep involves a number of break glass in case of mass offence sort of escape hatches, and that there's layers of how deep and how aggressive he can go. So I would love to know. Actually, I might email him and find out what he's got on you, just in case I ever need to actually pull that pin.
He said to me when he walked in, I saw the Peter Hitchens thing, as everybody's been saying to me recently. So he'd at least seen that, so he knows how I behave, and he knows, in other words, that if he did start sort of screaming at me, that I would probably just sit there and take it.
Right, okay. Like the philosophical cuck that you are.
Quite right.
Yeah, you're kind of
That's another quote for the Twitter bio, I think.
Yeah, have you updated it to I've decided I do not like you, Peter Hitchens?
It's in there somewhere. I think it's I actively dislike you is the quote that's now in my bio. I'm constantly shifting it around.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever get rid of unusually penetrating.
What was it that you were doing? What was it that you did for a while? Making theists question their beliefs and lesbians question their sexuality. What was it that you did for
bio? I'm constantly shifting it. It's in there somewhere. I think it's I actively dislike you is the quote that's now in my bio. I'm constantly shifting it around.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever get rid of unusually penetrating.
What was it that you were doing? What was it that you did for a while? Making theists question their beliefs and lesbians question their sexuality since...
I don't know what you're talking about.
I remember that in your bio.
I have no idea what you're talking about. We really have known each other a long time, haven't we? You know what I found yesterday? I sort of stumbled across it while looking for an email, trying to find out where we were filming today. And I found the original email that you sent me must have been 2019 when we first met. And it was amazing. It was this sort of, hi, Alex, been watching your stuff for a while. Like, it was sort of 3-4 paragraphs of text. I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with you. I think that your views will be of big interest to my viewers. And then I've already spoken to these people, and it was a bunch of people that I hadn't heard of, wasn't really in my sphere. And it signed off Chris Williamson Voodoo Events.
Fantastic. Yeah, wow, my previous life. Yeah. I had filling nightclubs in my signature until only 6 months ago, and I realized that I needed to get rid of it. But no, it's cool, man. I think, if I could invest money in people, you, George Mack, Zach, my housemate, Gwynder Bogle, Rob Henderson, even Rory Sutherland, I don't think that the market has priced in his talent. And it's so funny because, like, what I did for almost all of my career in nightlife was find different kind of talent, right? It was like degenerate party talent, but find kids that had good work ethic and some skill, and then bring them in and sort of train them up. So keeping your finger on the pulse of what's happening with regards to trends, of who is appropriate and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, man, there is a point, I will happily say it now, there is a point that's going to occur within the next few years where something happens with you being involved that just catapults you into like superstardom. Like, I would absolutely bet a shit ton of money that this is going to happen. You've got some... What's that big thing you're doing soon? Can we announce the big thing that you're doing soon? That even bigger debate?
I think not.
Right. Okay.
Only because it's still very much up in the air.
Right, okay.
However,
if and when that happens, it's going to break the internet.
That could be it.
Yeah.
Unless this does it for me.
Well, it very well might do. This is the biggest platform you've been on. So, when was the last time that you're aware of in your world of philosophy that something like a step change, like the equivalent of the discovery of the Higgs boson, happened?
In philosophy?
Yeah, just...
Every now and again something does come along that's a bit revolutionary. And a recent example, and by recent, consider we're talking about the history of philosophy here, 20th century, the theory of knowledge is completely exploded by a man called Edmund Gettier. And this is actually, I think, quite fascinating. I'll be interested to hear what you think about this. So knowledge is really difficult to define. People didn't used to have as much of a problem with it. Like, if you had to give a definition of knowledge, what does it mean to know something? This isn't like a trick question. I'm just interested. What do you think?
To know something, to be able to accurately predict what happens in the world.
Okay, so it's got something to do with it being true in the world and your ability to predict, but you can also think about things in the past, right? Like, you can know that Napoleon existed or something. So prediction,
and the ability to infer.
To infer, to sort of, to have some kind of belief about the world, which is true. Sure, but then imagine, for example, you're in like a locked concrete box with no windows, and I don't know, like some voodoo mystic tells you that it's raining outside, and they're just like insane, they're on drugs or something, and they just tell you that it's raining, they're convinced of it, and for some reason you believe them totally irrationally. And it just so happens that it is, by coincidence, raining outside.
Did you know?
Right. So you have a belief about the world which is true, but it would seem very strange to say that you know that it's raining outside, right? And so since Plato and the ancients, we've sort of had a consensus on the idea that knowledge is justified true belief, JTB. So you need to have a belief that's true. You need to, of course, believe it to be true, but you have to also be justified in that belief, and that's what makes it knowledge. So if you see that it's raining outside through the window, and you believe that it's raining outside, and then it's true that it's raining outside, now you can say you know that it's raining outside.
Right.
Okay. And this is just essentially consensus for potentially thousands of years we're talking about here. And then Edmund Gettier, in at least one account, this may be apocryphal, but it said that he sort of hadn't really published anything and was being compelled to get something in a journal, and he just sort of reaches into his papers of random things he's been writing, pulls up the one on the top, and hands it off for submission. This is about 2 or 3 pages long, and it just upends the whole thing with essentially a counterexample, which are now known as Gettier cases. So his example was to say, okay, imagine that you're in a job interview, and your interview goes really quite well, and the person says to you, you know, I shouldn't really be saying this, but I think you've got it. And so you go back outside and you're feeling pretty good. There are other candidates, but you've got a pretty justified reason to think that you're going to get the job. Then the other guy goes in, and while you're waiting for him, you know, you're just fiddling around in your pocket, and you take out whatever you've got in your pocket, and you've got 10 coins, and you're just fiddling with your 10 coins. So you develop a justified belief that the person who's going to get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Because you're pretty sure you're going to get the job, and you've just, by chance, you just had a look and you've got 10 coins. So you've got a justified belief that the person who's going to get the job has 10 coins in their pocket. There's been some kind of like freak mistake or something. Maybe they've read your name wrong on the form, or the person who told you they thought you got it meant to speak to the other person, but it turns out the other guy actually gets the job. But just by sheer coincidence, he also has 10 coins in his pocket.
Like, so many philosophers don't really understand that there's degrees to almost everything. Justification isn't a black or white thing. There's not like it's either justified or not. The case he's talking about isn't justified enough to actually reflect the world enough. But yeah, philosophers are so into black and white, especially academic philosophers. So, yeah.
The question is, did you know that the person who would get the job would have 10 coins in his pocket? You have a justified, true belief that the person who gets the job would have 10 coins in his pocket. But it seems in this circumstance, you didn't know that. That just seems wrong. It seems like a wrong account. It's a bit of a sort of clunky example, and he gives another one which is also maybe a little bit clunky, but this sort of sparks this type of affair called a Gettier case.
Well, you told me, I think, over dinner, the best Gettier case, which was the person behind the hedge.
Yes. So
this is better.
I think so. So I think it's actually better. Firstly, it's better to experience them for yourself, and there are simpler explanations as well. So I was in a car, driving around a bend, and over the hedge, I see this small child sort of bouncing up and down behind the hedge. And I thought to myself, oh, cool, I'm about to see a horse. I mean, it looked like the kid was riding a horse. And I was like, yeah, cool, we're going to see a horse. And we ride around this bend. And the kid was actually on his or her like dad's back. And that's why she was high up and bouncing up and down. But just by sheer coincidence, in the field behind them was a horse. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, I've just experienced a Gettier case. I had a justified true belief that I was about to see a horse. The difficulty with that one is that it's probably not justified to believe that I was about to see a horse, because I probably should have thought that it could have been a father. But a much more simple example, and this actually happened to me once. I was in the US Capitol building in the crypt, and they have the clock that used to be in the House of Representatives. And they said that the reason they replaced it and brought it down here was because they were fed up of winding it up. They didn't want to wind it anymore. And I looked at it, and I asked the tour guide lady, I said, oh, well, do they still wind it while it's down here? And she said, no. And I thought, but it's the time. It says the time right now. And she was like, oh, right, yeah, it must be a coincidence. And I was like the only one looking around like, hey, that's pretty extraordinary. I mean, I guess it happens twice a day, right? But this is a Gettier case. If your watch breaks but you don't know that it's broken, you've got a reliable watch. But today it's broken. and you look at the time, and it's stopped on 3:30. And so you look at it and you think, oh, it must be 3:30. And it does actually just so happen to be 3:30.
I don't remember this. Were there any good counters to the Gettier case about the justification, the quality of justification mattering? Refutal of Gettier. Strength of justification. Gettier problem. Yeah, okay. I'll do my turn and then look at the answers I got from philosophical stack. Think I'm doing this. Am I doing that? Might also do ball spiders into pew pew, which might make more sense in this case. This into this into pew pew. Yep. Cool. Anyway, what I came up with is basically this thing. So in philosophy stack exchange, one asks the same question I just did. So basically, that is justified only by luck. In those two cases, the justification part of the equation isn't good enough. Yeah. I'd say responding to cases by looking at what we mean by justification is a pretty standard response to Gettier cases. Goldman's reliabilism, relevant alternatives restriction can be read as being more strict about what it might take to count as sufficient justification. But this makes justification the central puzzling question. Anyway, my opponent isn't doing anything. Is justification in a knowledge attribution strictly stronger than justification as good reason to believe, or stronger still than reason to hold with a certain credence value? Justification is never 100%. It's always faulty, and we can't have a absolute knowledge of anything. I rest my case.
Did you know it was 3:30? That's a Gettier case. Justified true belief, and yet it seems weird to say that you know it.
Mm.
So Gettier's revelation here was something like what you're talking about, a sort of genuine novelty in the history of philosophy. And they come about quite rarely, but they do occur.
This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything that you need and nothing that you don't. It's a healthy alternative to sugary electrolyte drinks. It's got a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium. You might ask, what do I want with an electrolyte drink?
Commercials.
Well, it'll regulate your appetite. It'll curb
mental model to think that in order for me and you to have a discussion about ethics, our meta-ethical
I honestly
foundation,
think Gettier
we need
cases
to agree
are
on that.
trite. But
because
whatever.
out of that, if we don't, the entire ethical discussion on top will just continue to fall back to definitional problems and what you're presuming that so you can't discuss the stuff that happens on top unless you discuss the stuff that's underneath. And this is it's the entirety of the trans debate. right? It's the entirety of lexical overwhelm, that if you can't agree on the definition of words, the argument about the words and what they then refer to just collapses in on itself and continuously just falls back to an argument about the definition of words.
Yes, this happens with, for example, freedom. There are lots of different ways of conceiving of freedom. Famously, freedom from and freedom to, right? Is freedom just being left alone, or is freedom being empowered to do things that you should be able to do? And then when you have people arguing about nationalized healthcare, for example, one person says, to be free, you need to be healthy. And one person says, to be free, you need to spend your
I
own
have
money
9
as you
damage on
please, not be
board.
forced to fund other people's healthcare.
Could
Now,
be
both of these people can be
11.
right. They're just defining freedom differently, of course. So you're quite right. And that's why metaethics is quite important. I mean,
Maybe
A.J.
I
Ayer
can do
pointed out
this.
in Language, Truth and Logic that the vast majority of ethical debate is not ethical debate. It's
I
descriptive
have
debate.
5
It's
mana
factual
left.
debate. If you look at
We
the so-called
could
ethical
do
debate
also
around
this.
gun laws in America, for example, people are
We
talking about
only need to
statistics.
hit once.
They're saying X many people die per year. Oh, well, don't you know that more children are killed
Oh
by
no, then
swimming
I can't do
pools?
this.
Don't you know
Whatever.
that, like, if we introduce, you know, if we ban certain types of weapons or blah blah blah, that this many less people will die. All these kind of things are just descriptive, factual statements that people like to dispute with each other, and that's why they like to say we have the facts on our side. But
Almost.
the actual ethical question that undergirds it all is hardly ever even reached. You know, and so most of the time people are actually arguing about that. I mean, the same thing with an abortion debate, for example. You know, questions about biology. When does consciousness emerge? Can it survive on its own outside of the womb this week or this week? You know, this kind of stuff. Will it increase the number of women who die or decrease the number of women who die? But none of these are ethical questions. And people think they're having an ethical debate when they're actually just having a debate about facts that can be resolved in principle by scientific empirical inquiry. The ethical question is the more interesting one that's often assumed. And if people think that they agree with each other or understand each other in the same way on that ethical first point, then you're in for a disaster.
What do you wish
if they don't, I mean.
Yeah, what do you wish that more people could realize when it comes to understanding ethics and consistency in their own lives? Is there something that a little red pill or a particular insight that you wish you could deposit into the mind of the populace that you think would make their lives a little bit more easy or their sense making a bit more simple?
I don't know about making lives easier, but I do think that people should recognize the extent to which emotions dominate our ethical thinking. I mean, I think it's seen as a relatively eccentric view that ethics just is the expression of emotion. This was something popularized by that same A.J. Ayer in a book that was so troubling to the philosophical consensus at the time that there's a story of I think it was maybe a dean of Balliol College or something, who, when a student came in, everybody wanted to talk about this book, and they were so scared of the implications of it that he literally throws it out of the window because he just doesn't want to talk about it. Because Ayer's talking about how the only things that can be meaningful are those which are analytically true or empirically verifiable. If the statement you're making isn't something you can at least in principle test empirically, or something that's just a tautology, 2 and 2 is 4, then what you're saying is literally meaningless. And people came to him and said, well, what about ethical statements? You can't prove these in principle and they're not tautological. And he said, well, the way that they're meaningful is that they are
Found it.
expressions of emotion. And it gives birth to this view called emotivism, which is really a philosophy of language more than a philosophy of ethics. It tries to describe what people mean when they say good or bad. And famously, he comes up with this analogy that saying murder is wrong is like saying boo murder. And saying murder is, or saying given to charity is good is like saying yay charity. It's just an expression of emotion. It's not even the same thing as saying I like charity or I don't like murder, because those things can be true or false. They have truth value. It could be true that it is just a psychological fact that I don't like murder. He means murder is wrong. That statement is just the expression of the emotion.
Yep.
Boo murder. And I think even if you don't agree with him to that extent, as I more or less do, if you begin to recognize the extent to which emotions are dominating your ethical conduct, pay attention to what it feels like when you analyze something as wrong. I think it belongs in the same category as,
because you've got this sort of
emotion
suite of soup of sort of stimulus going on inside of you. What is it like to feel like something is wrong?
And we know that people seem to change what they rationally do based on how they're feeling. I mean, I don't know if you've come across terror management theory before. It would surprise me if you hadn't. The idea that all human beings are doing is trying to manage their fear of death. And that's what motivates all human activity. And there have been some interesting studies in this. Some of them are harder to replicate than others. But, I mean, the first one, the most famous, was some, I think, Arizona state judges. And they were being asked to recommend a bond for the solicitation of prostitution. And what the researchers did was they asked them to fill out just a form first. And on half of the forms, they just mentioned death. They just put in a few questions about death. You know, what do you think happens after death? You know, who would you put in your will? That kind of stuff. Nothing too extreme. And they found that the bond that was set by the judges, I mean, I think the average bond for the control group was less than $100, and for the ones who were reminded of their death was like $200 or $300 on average.
What does that imply?
So the interpretation of terror management theory was that when we're reminded of our deaths, we need to temporarily more heavily reaffirm the sort of death-denying aspects of our culture. The reason that we do things, the reason we create art, the reason that we get out of bed, the reason that we have conversations like this is because in some way it's traceable back to trying to essentially deny our own death. Ernest Becker wrote a book called The Denial of Death, right? And this is essentially the idea. And so for judges, it might be something like by participating in the legal system, they're participating in something that's a bit beyond them, and therefore it exists outside of their own mortality. And so the thesis, this mortality salience hypothesis, as it's known, is that for a judge, if they're reminded of their own death, what they will temporarily be compelled to do is more harshly reaffirm
more damage than
that
necessary.
thing that is, you know, the death-denying aspect of their daily life, which is participation in the legal system, so more harsh penalties.
Right, okay.
Now, that to me seems...
If I end up losing with one life
I'm
left.
not sure about that, but it does seem strange that when you remind people of their own death, they will, you know, Christians and like Muslims will become more derogatory towards Jews. People of different nationalities will sit further away from each other. People will, when asked to draw pictures of currency, will draw physically larger pictures of currency. People's opinion on whether they prefer a picture of a forest or a picture of, you know, suburban neighborhood will change on average. Like these things are extraordinary just from being reminded of your own death. Of course, the biggest manifestation of the denial of death would be religion. And that would also explain why, you know, religion deals a lot with death, and why sort of, if you remind people of their own death, they also become religious, which, by the way, is true of atheists as well. People who don't believe in God will still become more religious, even if they don't ultimately believe in God when reminded of their own death.
Yeah, I've been thinking a good bit recently about how people do an awful lot, especially in the modern world, that is death denialism masquerading as something else. I think the productivity movement very much is that, you know, trying to fit more into less time. If only I could get more life, more work, more output out of my 1 unit of days or whatever. I think that a good chunk of the health and fitness world, the longevity movement, the biohacking movement, all of that is absolutely death denialism. And you can see as well nutrition. All of the arguments about, is it better for me to be carnivore or vegan? Should I go high carb or low carb? Can I do intermittent fasting? Should I be using ketones exogenously? Ultimately, the reason that I think these arguments are so vehement and passionate, especially when you think it's diet, guys, right? It's diet. It's like, I want to have aspartame, you want to have sugar. Like, how does my aspartame consumption or you impact your sugar consumption? But what it hits at for a lot of people is a certainty about, I can predict and project out into the future how long I'm going to be able to live or die, and I'm going to be able to compare myself to this other person. And their conviction in their particular approach, which derogates my approach implicitly, suggests to me, you're going to die sooner. And that causes me to be fucking terrified. It's the same reason why people are so, how long do you need to do? It's not VO2 max that's most important. It's HRV. It's not. It's resting heart rate. It's not. It's galvanic skin temperature. We're not looking at that. We're looking at telomere length. We're not looking at that. It's whatever. All of the things, you know, the entire field of health and fitness, which I'm a big part of, I think is a good chunk of it is death denialism, just masquerading as getting big biceps.
Yes. So sometimes it is more obvious. I think we need more nihilist health influencers who will sort of say, you know,
I need to
when the question is asked, you know, should you eat white bread or brown bread or whatever it is, you know, that they'll sort of begin with the question. It sort of depends on your views on the intrinsic value of life. Also, if you're a bit of a utilitarian, I mean, people often say that being unhealthy might be unethical because in a country with nationalized healthcare,
you're a burden.
You're a burden. But are you? I mean, who costs the taxpayer more? The person who eats a bunch of burgers and has a heart attack and dies instantly, or the person who lives into old age and therefore has some kind of long-term health problem like Alzheimer's or dementia?
I need to interject here. So you ring me, probably 3 years ago, 4 years ago. You ring me, and I'm in the gym, and you say something like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "I'm in the gym." "What are you doing?" "Oh, just whatever. Catch up a little bit." I was like, "What's going on? What's happening?" And you said, "I'm trying nihilism." And I said, "What do you mean?" And you went, "As a life philosophy, I'm trying nihilism." And I still don't know what you mean. So how is your experiment to make nihilism great again going?
Well, I was getting a bit fed up of people saying, "Oh, you're a nihilist. Oh, you're an atheist." Well, they wouldn't say it in the terms of nihilism. They'd say, "Oh, you're an atheist." Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there was a clip of Jordan Peterson on the Lex Friedman podcast, and he says, "Oh, you're secular, and you go to art galleries, yeah? Well, what makes you think you're secular?" And the head turn is real. He does that, you know.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, what on earth are you talking about, man? You think you can't be an atheist and enjoy art? Now, I've tried my best to understand what he was getting at, and I think he was trying to basically say that in order to enjoy art, you need to have some kind of value, and in order to have any kind of surface level value, you can always ask the why that question. You know, why do you value this? Why, you know, the classic sort of why do you go to school to get a good grade? Well, you don't just want the grade. Why do you get the grade? You do it to get a good job, and so on and so forth. Happens with value. And so why do you value art? Because maybe you value beauty or something. And Peterson's whole thing is that whatever's at the top of this value hierarchy is, in his definition, divine. He just defines it as such. And so he essentially said that, like, you know, people claim that they are nihilists, but they don't live like that. I thought, well, what would it mean to really live like a nihilist? And, you know, I guess I tried to emphasize. But he's right to the extent that I think most people don't live like they're nihilists.
What would the definition of living like a nihilist be?
I think it would just mean the rejection of any such thing as a non-contingent reason for acting.
Be more accessible.
You would need to really think that there's no reason to do anything outside of essentially your crude preferences and biological drives.
Right.
And I think the reason why people think that nihilism is unlivable is because they have this image of somebody just immediately becoming a Raskolnikov type figure and just committing a murder or something. But they forget that these people still have their memory. You know, they're going to be embedded in a culture and an upbringing that their preferences are essentially still going to be aligned. I mean, Penn Jillette was once asked, if you're an atheist, why don't you kill and assault every person you want to? And he says, I do kill and assault everybody I want to, which is precisely nobody. You know, and very clever, gets a bit of an applause. But I mean, the difficult question ethically is what happens when somebody doesn't have that view. What happens when somebody does just disagree with you? But I don't know. It was kind of boring.
Just to interject there, so you could see the meaning-making machine of society and cultural norms as being useful to constrain the behavior of those outlier people, the ones who would go out and commit the litany of mass murders. But,
yes.
You know, Mum told me that I'm not supposed to squash bugs when I was 5 years old, and this is now carried on through. But yeah, I think, you know, for most people, we are the descendants of the people who avoided, at least for the most part, killing people that were close to us. And we feel a lot of the time like we're now close to each other.
Yes. I think that's probably true. The issue is that the more that we try to explain away these mechanisms, we try to understand why in our evolutionary history we might have evolved certain moral taboos, this kind of stuff. It begins to essentially take the complete ethical force out of it, and that's what people think leads to nihilism. Once you have fully explained why something would be considered immoral, just on evolutionary grounds, you've essentially taken out the moral factor altogether, and you're just explaining it in terms of genetic preference.
Yeah, there's no more meaning. There's nothing. There's no additional fluff or feeling of anything. But this is, I've spent a lot of time over the last few years talking to evolutionary psychologists, evolutionary biologists, people that have looked at the evolution of culture as well from a mimetic standpoint too. And it does seem to me that culture is just like exclusively an adaptive response to coordination at large scale. And that all of the things that are encoded in that are effective ways for your tribe to not blow itself up.
Would you say the same thing about morality in general?
Yes.
So then, how do you escape this nihilist conundrum that you think all it is, the reason why you're not killing people is just because you sort of evolved that way? Doesn't that kind of take out some of the meaning?
So I think if you were permanently self-assessing why you do the things you do and the inputs that you feel, but what that doesn't account for is the fact that we are self-deceptive.
Quite right, yeah.
And the sense of being a human is one that is imbued with meaning. I often use this term about how you are not personally cursed as a reassurance. And it was something that was reassuring to me. If I was spending a bit of time where I was feeling sad or down or whatever, it would feel like whatever emotion I was going through, whatever unpleasant emotion I was going through, was like a personal curse. And this makes sense when you look back at how the gods were personified as different sorts of emotions, right? That, Cupid had an arrow that hit you, or that, you had gods of war, you had gods of wrath, you had gods of envy, you had gods of narcissism, because the experience of a thing, of a thought, of an emotion, of a state, is not just the confused chemical signals of your body. And now I can just reverse engineer this. Even the interaction of you and whatever's going on in the social group around you isn't just that. It's imbued with meaning because you interpret things in this soup of experience, which scales things up from just what's happening to, and it feels like there's something, it feels like there's some there, right?
Yes. Yeah, you can't escape that illusion if it is an illusion. This is another thing that I spoke to Ben about. First name basis, it seems now.
Mr. Shapiro.
Mr. Shapiro. I did try that in, when I was emailing back and forth about setting up that event, I went to type out sort of like, well, oh, it'd be great to talk to Mr. Shapiro about, and it just didn't feel right. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. At least not behind his back. Not to say that I'm rude behind his back, but it felt even weirder that he wasn't there to sort of appreciate the courtesy. Anyway, he said, that I don't believe in free will. I don't know if you believe in free will. Perhaps we can talk about that. He's like, look, you don't believe in free will, but you act as if free will does exist all the time. And I remember thinking, what do you mean? What does it look like to act as though free will doesn't exist? The very argument, or one of the arguments against free will, is that you are essentially driven by your biology, your genes, your will. The Arthur Schopenhauer line that you can do what you will, you just can't will what you will. In fact, you have to do what you will. That's what drives behavior. If that's the case, then why do you have this vision in your head that if you lack a belief in free will, you're not going to get out of bed in the morning? The very argument is that you will get out of bed in the morning because you desire to go and get some breakfast. That's like the whole point. And so any argument of that form where people say, well, you don't live like that's the case, I always like to think, well, what would it look like to you then? If I could ask Jordan Peterson when he says, well, you don't live like an atheist, what would that look like to you? And I don't know if he might say something like, well, you'd probably be this morally depraved, self-interested, blah, blah, blah. Like, maybe, but is that really what you think? I mean, I don't know, but...
Yeah, I think it forgets the fact that you are a product of your time, regardless of your beliefs from that time.
Yeah.
Right? I understand the Judeo-Christian values that everything is based on, it's like a common talking point from those guys. But, okay, how am I supposed to extricate me from that?
What?
Completely the Etch-a-Sketch of my value set and then take it from the beginning. And let's not forget, like, a lot of those values
should have
grown out
attacked
of
with
what would have
the
been an
web
adaptive
spinner at
response
first.
in any case.
Yeah.
So
The illusion is there. The illusion is unshakable. And so it sort of is a bit senseless to me to ask, particularly on the free will thing. Like, oh, why don't you act like free will doesn't exist? What do you
does that
mean?
mean?
I literally, it's unintelligible to me.
Did you listen to my Sapolsky episode yet?
No, I
Right.
don't think so.
So his new book, Determined,
Mm.
Science
Oh,
of
yes.
a Life Without Free Will. Every time that I talk about free will,
Mm.
people get upset.
Why is that?
That's the question for you. I think the reason...
Insert joke about how it's not their fault.
Yeah, lol.
It's like my least favorite genre of joke that's done
through no free will of my own.
in philosophy. It's
every single time.
every
Through no
time,
free will of
without
my own.
fail. Yeah.
I don't know. And it's something that the conversation about free will is such a turn-off for people that I actively push it further into episodes. I actively don't title episodes that have got that in it. I can surreptitiously coax people into thinking about it, but the response is very... it's a high amount of dissatisfaction. People don't like to think about that. Now, it may be because it's dry. I'm open to that.
That's true.
It may be because it threatens their sense of agency and sovereignty, which is something I've kind of built this channel off the back of. Like, you can enact change within your own life, internalize your locus of control, stop being such a bitch, etc. And so maybe I'm a victim of my own foundation in that regard, that I've selected for a particular group of people. But it's happened a few times, a few different conversations about it, tangential. One guy was a quasi-compatibilist. You're shaking your head. Why are you shaking your head?
That it's just the most ludicrous compromise to me. Compatibilism.
Am I right in saying that compatibilism just kicks the can down the road and plays lexical overload with things?
I think more or less.
Right.
A lot of the time, you're just also dealing with essentially a redefinition of free will. It's what
I don't mean that. I mean this thing.
Yeah. Sam Harris has called it the Atlantis fallacy. He had an extended argument with Daniel Dennett, a compatibilist, about free will, and Daniel Dennett would talk about how this exists and this exists and this, and Sam was like, yeah, that's true, but you're just not talking about what people care about in free will. What you're doing is we're trying to ask if Atlantis exists, and you're pointing to Venice, and you're saying, look, here's a city. It's got a lot of water, and it's kind of old, and these are all true, but it's just not Atlantis.
Yeah.
And what most people are talking about when they try to bring free will back into the discussion is just not free will. It's as straightforward as it gets, in my view. I mean, there are versions of freedom that can be sensibly believed in. It kind of depends on what your conception of freedom means. But if you mean something like authorship over your actions, if you mean that we could have rewound the clock and I could have done something
tunnel
different,
visioned on
then
that
I could have worn
combo.
a different
I
shirt.
couldn't count my own
I think that
health.
the answer is yes. Logically, yes. The possible worlds discussion earlier, there's a possible world where I'm in a different shirt. But I guess, like, physically, possibly metaphysically, I couldn't have made a different choice.
Well, regardless
of
what you believe or don't believe about free will, people's response to it is fascinating to me. Absolutely fascinating. And maybe it is that degree of control, almost like the denial of death. Like, I wonder, have they done experiments on when people are reminded that they do or do not have free will, that their behavior adjusts?
Not that I know of, but I would love to see that. Because if it is, I mean, maybe it is true, but I think if it is true, I can understand why it might be quite, like, fatalistic. I mean, it literally is quite fatalistic, really, to say that there's no freedom. And I can understand why that might make someone sad, and that sadness might motivate their behaviors slightly differently. But I think that intrinsically, if there are a way to control for people who are sort of happy or sad about it, because you can believe in there's no free will and be like, thank goodness it's all out of my hands. If you can control for that and show that people they are, like, less productive, or they don't get out of bed as much, then I think that would be meaningful, and it might be a sort of second order reason not to have this conversation. I don't know if there's been such a investigation as there has to death, which, by the way, I think a good example of the death denial thing is to think about your magnum opus. If you were sort of working on the great life work or something, and you're about to die, and you're just about to sort of to finish it off. Suppose you found out that after you publish this and you die, a week later, you found out that a meteor was going to come and destroy the Earth. Everybody dies. Does that make you more or less enthusiastic about finishing your project? Now, for most people, I think it's going to make them less enthusiastic. It would certainly make me less enthusiastic. But why? What's the difference to you? It doesn't make a difference. You're going to be dead beforehand anyway. Nothing's going to change. Seems to suggest that maybe, the desire to get this done before you die in the first place isn't just, as people like to claim, for the love of the art and it's all in the process. No, it's because here's a work that's going to outlive you. Here's something that's going to help you to escape your own death. And when faced with the inevitability of the destruction of even that, the motivation goes down. I wouldn't be surprised if simply reminding somebody who's writing a play or something that one day, heat death, everything evaporates, including your new book, if that would make them less motivated to finish the book. Which to me implies that the reverse corollary is that the reason you are making the book is in some way indebted to the fact that you think it will outlive you, and therefore is an exercise in the denial of death.
Didn't Ernest Becker die at an unfortunate time?
I don't know much about his personal life.
I think he did.
But there are some, there are interesting coincidences like that dotted across a lot of. The thing about coincidences is that so many
Free
things
will is a phenomenon we start with
that the only
when
extraordinary
we
thing
start
would
thinking.
be if there weren't some extraordinary things
coincidence.
As
like
easy
that.
as
Like
that,
Albert
sorry.
Camus was killed in a
We
car
cannot
crash.
think through,
And he was
like,
killed in a car
over
crash
our thinking.
with a train ticket in his pocket. So it seemed like he decided at the last minute to go in the car and he had previously said that the most absurd way to die would be in an automobile accident. And that's how he dies.
Wow.
Sigmund Freud was terrified of, I think it was the number 63. It was like 63, or maybe it was like 48. I can't remember. It was one of the a number around that. He was just terrified of it. Had a real sort of foreboding about it for some reason. And he got a phone number that ended in that number, and it freaked him out. He got a hotel room that had that number, and he just became convinced that he was going to die at that age. Guess when he died?
48.
No, when he was like 80. Sometimes it goes wrong.
You're a dick. You are a dick.
The rest of that was true, though.
All right. What's your sexy paradox that you wanted to show me?
Oh, yeah. So
Get your paradox out for the lad.
Think about this, right? Now, I can't remember what the source is, and I want to attribute the person who does it. Maybe I can find it.
Yeah, get it.
Let me find it, because I want to make sure that they get the credit for it. I was told about it by a friend, and you have to give me a minute because I don't want to pass this off as my own.
Like you do with everything else.
No
I
taunt.
think it's
Come
called
on.
the Anthropic. So it's a website called risingentropy.com. Is seemingly the origin of this paradox, but I was told about it by a friend, and it's I guess, okay, so imagine that, and what this does is it shows us that different ways of thinking give us wildly different answers to the same problem, different ways of like looking at a problem. So imagine that there's a maniac who, and it's called the Anthropic Dice Killer, if you want to look it up. There's a maniac who is kidnapping people and murdering them. And what he does is he kidnaps one person, and he blindfolds them, and he rolls a dice. And if that dice is a 6, then he'll kill you. If not, he'll let you go free. And what he'll do if he lets you go free is he'll go and pick up 2 people, kidnap them, blindfold them, roll the dice. If it's a 6, kills you. If it's anything else, go free. Then it's 4 people. Then it's 8 people. And it doubles. So it's an exponential
Until
growth.
he hits a 6.
Until he hits a 6. Now, you wake up, knowing all this information, you wake up blindfolded. And you know these facts. And you know that a dice is about to be rolled, but you're blindfolded, you don't know how many people are there with you. You're given a button that you can press that will make the chances that you're killed half, 1 and 2. So if you want to, you can press this button, and 50% of the time it will just kill you immediately, and 50% of the time you'll get to go free. Or you can let him roll the dice.
Okay.
What do you do? Do you press the button or not?
So, at least on the surface, this is to do with the probability of 1 in 6 versus 1 in 2.
Yeah.
But there is this escalating thing that's happening in the background. So I would presume that you would say, don't hit the button, because that has increased the chance of you being killed from 1 in 6 to 1 in 2.
Right.
Which
and
is great.
And this seems true, and it is true. That, yeah, I mean, like, you've got a 1 in 6 chance of dying, and if you press the button, you've got a 1 in 2. So you're better off rolling the dice. But if you think about it as a sort of as one big block, then something very strange happens, because if you consider all of the people involved, if all you know is that you've sort of woken up and you're somewhere in this process, then interestingly, like, say it gets to number 2, it gets to round 2, then there have been 3 people involved, 3 victims involved.
The
right?
first
We've
one
had
and
the
then the
first one
second
and
two.
the second 2. And 2 of them end up dying, and 1 of them goes free. So if you find yourself in this situation as a victim, you've got a more than half probability that you're in the second group that ends up dying. I suppose that actually it ends in the third group. Right? Now there are how many people involved? You've got 1, then 2,
Then 4.
then 4.
Yep.
So we've now got 7 people involved, right? And 4 people end up dying. And so if you sort of wake up in this scenario, you've got a 4 in 7 chance that you're going to die, that you're going to be one of the people who dies, which is more than half. And this continues, such that if you consider the fact that it doesn't matter where it ends, you're always going to have a slightly higher than half chance that you're in the group that ends up getting killed.
But is it more than half, given that each round of the dice roll is only 1 in 6?
Yeah. Because it's about, like, if in fact it gets to number 3,
Right.
like, you know that you're going to be in the there's a more than half chance that you're going to be in the group that dies. If it in fact gets to number 2, then there's a more than half chance that you're going to die. If it in fact gets to number 4,
So I'm going to hit the button. Is that right?
well, maybe. I mean, it seems ludicrous to hit the button, but thinking about it this way, it seems like that's what you should actually do. It's simultaneously the case that you have got a 1 in 6 chance of dying because you're doing it on the roll of a dice. But at the same time, if you think about the fact that one of these groups is going to end up dying, and it doesn't matter where it ends, the chances of you being in that group are always going to be slightly higher than half.
Right. From a population level.
That's why it's
There is-
the anthropic dice killer, because it's the anthropic principle. It's thinking about.
Yeah, what's that? I once read a sci-fi book that was there was a threat of the end of the world, and they were looking to get humanity off the planet. And there is a theory that uses almost this exact same idea, which says that if you take the entirety of human history and you were to pick a time at which you were to live, and you have this rapid increase toward humanity, it works out that it's more likely that you are within some % of the end of humanity
Right. Yeah.
because of
Because of the exponential growth.
precisely.
Yeah. Exactly.
Are you familiar with this idea?
I don't think so.
Right, but it works.
But it's fascinating. It's the same kind of principle. Yeah.
Works the exact same. Yeah.
As long as that graph is going up at the requisite
Yes.
speed, then yeah.
Right, and this is the exact same thing.
I mean, the version on the website actually involves snake eyes. So it's 2 dice, and instead of it being 1, then 2, then 4, it's 1, then 10, then 100, then 1,000.
Right,
They get
yeah,
kidnapped.
so it ramps up more quickly.
And now you're rolling snake eyes. So it's a 1 in 36 chance. And it turns out that if you add up the probability of like, n number of cases, it's something like a 90% chance versus the half that you get to press, which just seems ludicrous. And it seems that 2 things are true at once, depending on just how you look at the problem. So sometimes problems like this are just to do with the way you word them. I mean, there are tons of like these sort of interesting maths paradoxes, which aren't paradoxes at all. You must be familiar with the man who walks into the hotel, pays £30, goes up to his room, and the bellboy says, or the guy behind the bar says, the manager says, oh no, he should have only paid 25. We've got a deal on. So he calls the bellboy and says, can you go and give him £5 back to the man in the room? And the bellboy thinks to himself on the way up, like, this guy doesn't know any better. He doesn't know how much he owed. I'm gonna pocket £3 for myself. I'm only going to give him £2. So he goes back to the room. He says, excuse me, sir, sorry, I know you paid £30. You paid too much. Here's £2 change. So how much has the man now paid?
£25. No, £28.
£28. And how much has the bellboy got in his pocket?
2.
He gave the guy £2 back.
Right. Where's that money come from?
Yeah, he's got 3. So the bellboy. So the man's now only paid £28. He's paid £30. He gets £2 back from the bellboy.
Yeah.
So he's paid £28. The bellboy's got £3 in his pocket, which makes 31. So where's the extra pound come from?
Actually, no, he hasn't. The guy paid 25 plus now he's got 2 back.
That's right. So it's the way you word it, right?
Right,
So this
yeah, yeah,
this like stumps people,
Mm-hmm.
and you can do it the other way around as well. You can say that the guy goes up and he gives the bellboy gives £3 back to the guy, so he's only paid £27, but the bellboy's got 20. He's got £2. And it's only 29. And this, you know, it sort of goes viral on social media because people are like, how the hell does it work?
It's the blue and black or green and gold dress.
It's like, I mean, for those that, I guess there is. It's like those in that there is a real answer to what's actually going on there. I mean, the
lead
easiest
people based on
how
wording.
you word it. It's how people, you know, shortchange when they scam people at a bar or something. I mean, the easiest way to visualize that particular problem is to imagine that the man was only supposed to pay £2. You know, so the bellboy goes up and gives him 28. He's supposed to give him £28 and decides to pocket £2 for himself. So you say, oh, so he gives him, you know, gives him £26 back. So how much has the man paid? Like £4. And how much the bellboy got? Like £26, which is ludicrous. But you'd be amazed at how easily people can be completely and utterly stumped by it. And it's all in the wording. So a problem like the Anthropic Dice Killer, I wonder how much is just sort of to do with the way that you describe it. You know.
Have there been any paradoxes that sent you into a fugue state for a little while? Was there anything that captured a particularly long amount of time that you sort of couldn't stop considering?
Well, most of the famous ones since I first started learning about paradoxes, like the famous Monty Hall problem, that obsessed me for well, I wouldn't say obsessed me, but I was sort of blown away by it. There's also, you know, the Monty Hall problem. You'll definitely have heard of this before. This it's the game show and the 3 doors.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right? There are interesting paradoxes that aren't actually paradoxes. So there's a book by Jim Al-Khalili called Paradox, which is a description of so-called paradoxes. So, like, I think Olber's paradox is when people used to think that the universe was infinite, infinitely large. I mean, there was this problem that if empty space is filled up fairly randomly with stars, I mean, we know there's a lot of stars in the sky, and galaxies and objects that emit light, then there should essentially be no darkness in the sky. The sky should look kind of like an overcast day, because like the gaps in the sky, you know, are all
infinite amount of light
going to be filled up,
through.
and any small gap, you might think the stars are really far away, they'll also be like closer together, therefore emitting more light visually, and they'll be bigger, and so if the universe is infinite, you should just see a sort of overcast day. And it was a paradox. It was like, how does this happen? And it basically became an interesting proof that the universe has a beginning, that the universe is not in fact infinite, just the fact that it gets dark at night. Because if it were actually infinite, there should be a sort of overcast view, Olber's paradox. And like I say, it's sort of a paradox, but not really a paradox.
Are you familiar with the Boetes void? Do you know this?
I think so.
So this is like my favorite part of the universe. I'd say like I'm mapping it like my favorite barbecue restaurants in Austin. And it's a huge, what's referred to as a super void, which is a period of the universe, an area of the universe, which has way fewer galaxies in it than you would anticipate. And given what's the principle of like homogeneity across the universe that it should be relatively similar, right?
Like thermodynamics.
Yes, that it should.
Entropy and
You're just saying space words at me.
well, you know, like when you spray an aerosol can, and it will eventually spread up the room
equally. So the point is that there shouldn't be huge fluctuations in the way that we see the universe. Everything should be spread relatively evenly. Now, I found out that supposedly at the point of the Big Bang, there were 1 million particles of antimatter and 1,000,001 particles of matter. And it is that 1 to 1,000,001 ratio that is exactly where everything that we see comes from. And this minor imbalance is actually what's permitted everything to exist. But this particular Boetes, B-O-O-1 with an umlaut, T-E-S, Boetes supervoid, it's just super fucking
Should have
interesting.
done the duck
gap
first.
where there's way fewer galaxies than there should be. You think, why should this exist, given that we've got this sort of principle of homogeneity across the universe? And that's one of my favorite things to like learn about.
Yeah, it's a bit. Is it that we know about this void because of the disbalance, or is it that we hypothesize the disbalance because of the knowledge of the void?
We know based on mapping of, I think, I'm not sure if it's telescopic or if it's microwave background stuff,
Right.
but we know that it's there.
Right.
And the question is, what the fuck is this thing doing there?
Yeah, well, that's a bit like sort of dark energy when we discover that galaxies are spinning a little bit too quickly on the outside. There seems to be something like pushing them along.
What do you make of the fine-tune universe idea?
A lot of people describe it as the most powerful argument for God's existence. Christopher Hitchens in the back of a car once said that was really what gave him pause. I don't find that it moves me very much. I mean, it does seem quite extraordinary that had any of the constants of the universe, the force of gravity, for example, if it was stronger or weaker by the most unimaginably small amount, then it would either be strong enough that the universe would collapse in on itself, or it would be so weak that atoms couldn't even form, or at least objects couldn't form, and everything just gets blown apart at the Big Bang. Three explanations for this. It's chance, it's necessity, or it's design. And chances seems like a ludicrous suggestion. I mean, there are lots of different constants, and it may be the case that we discover this sort of theory of everything that reduces it down to one. Still a huge mystery as to why it has the sort of the constant that it does, but would mean that we're not talking about lots of different constants in harmony.
Somehow happens to be unified in one way.
But the idea of it sort of necessarily being that way doesn't seem that out of the question for me. Like, people put in the language of saying that had the constants been different by this amount, the universe couldn't exist. And what people often hear is the chances of the constant being as it was the same number. But I don't think that's the same thing. It might just be not possible that it could have had a different value.
What's that? Is it the observer selection effect of this?
This doesn't work for the fine-tuning argument.
I should have hit
The
first.
so-called like anthropic principle. The universe seems designed for human life. It seems odd. Like, people might point to, for example, the Earth's perfect distance from the sun in the so-called Goldilocks zone. Had it been a little bit further out or a little bit closer, humans couldn't exist. And the easy answer to that is to say, well, yeah, but if you didn't exist, then you wouldn't be there to observe that it didn't exist, right? And so you say, given the size of the universe, life might develop somewhere, possibly in multiple places, and the places where it's going to be observed coming about is where it comes about. So no surprise. That works there, but the fine-tuning constants of the universe, we're not talking about like a potential billions of Earths that could all give rise to human beings. We're talking about if one of these constants was different by the tiniest amount, nothing exists. And sure, it is still true that did it not happen,
We wouldn't be here to observe it.
Yeah, my friend Josh Parikh has given me an example in the past of, like, I don't know, you can imagine like a series of highly trained knife throwers just lob like 100,000 knives at you in an attempt to kill you, and they all miss perfectly, cutting out the silhouette of your body behind you, absolutely perfectly, just like uncanny. And someone says, well, they must have done that on purpose. It's like a trick, right? And you say, no, I think it's just happened by chance. You say, well, that's ludicrous. Oh, well, if it didn't, then I wouldn't be here to observe that it did, would I? It still just wouldn't do it for you. Even though that is true, had you been killed, you wouldn't be there to observe it. It just seems such an unlikely coincidence that just doesn't work when we're talking about the actual fundamental stuff of the universe, which is why people are so troubled by it. But I do think, generally speaking, with all of these kinds of things, fine-tuning, consciousness is another example that's broadly in the scientific realm that people think like this just can't be explained without reference to a god. Maybe they're right, I don't know. But if you intuitively were to step into a time machine and look at some people having this conversation, and you said, like imagine them looking back and saying, gosh, can you believe they hadn't worked out fine-tuning yet? They hadn't figured out the constants. Oh, they hadn't figured out the science of consciousness yet. I can conceive of that. Just intuitively, I can see someone doing that. But when I think about my arguments for atheism, the problem of evil, divine hidden, this kind of stuff, I can't imagine somebody looking through a time machine similarly at a conversation that I have and going, gosh, can you believe it? They hadn't worked out the problem of evil yet. They hadn't worked out divine hiddenness yet. I think these are perennial problems. So where you have these scientific arguments for the existence of God, I guess I just have more of a trust that they will one day be explained in a way that won't require recourse to a divine author, in a way that my criticisms of religion will probably not be similarly resolved.
We had a great conversation in Austin as you explained to me about the potential historical accuracy or inaccuracy of Jesus' resurrection. Can you go through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this sometimes is used as an argument for the existence of God, but I think more successfully is used once you've already established the existence of God to try to establish the truth of Christianity. And that is a bunch of historical facts surrounding Jesus's alleged resurrection that you sort of have to ask what the best explanation is for. Now, you can't historically prove a resurrection, but you can historically prove events and then ask what the best explanation of those facts is. So people will often point to the fact that there was a man called Jesus walking around morally teaching people, who was crucified by the Romans, and that a few days after his death was seen, or people made claims that they'd seen him after he'd died. And the question is, how do you explain these facts? The gospel reliability is an interesting question in general, and people will often, on the surface level, say, look, the Bible contradicts itself. It's full of contradictions. And there are some seeming contradictions in the gospel stories, but
One damage
what a lot of
short.
people neglect to
lethal.
consider is that when we're talking about a text as a historical document, contradictions shouldn't make us think that it's like less accurate, but more accurate. If historical sources contradict each other, that's evidence of their accuracy rather than evidence of the opposite. Because if this is a mythical story that somebody's making up, you would expect the details to concur. That is, if you're questioning two suspects in some kind of murder trial or something, and their stories match up perfectly, like to the T, the timings, everything, it arouses suspicion. It seems like somebody's inventing something. Someone's coming up with a story here and trying to perfect it. Now, people have this idea that a bunch of people got together and tried to fool the world into this sort of mythical story of this man rising from the dead. Do you think they would have made the mistake of just including these blatant contradictions? I don't know. In other words, I think if somebody was making it up, they probably would have taken more care.
Is there a term for this?
I'm sure there is.
Right.
I'm not a historian. I couldn't tell you what it is.
Right.
But we do see contradictions on the minor points. We don't really see much disagreement about the major points. I mean, there is still enough disagreement that I think to arouse suspicion. I mean, I'm saying this as if I'm some kind of Christian or theist. I sort of put on that hat when I'm asked to have a conversation of this kind. I mean, it does seem to me suspicious, for example, that the Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest Gospel, contains no post-resurrection appearances. And then the Gospel of Matthew does include post-resurrection appearances. The Gospel of Luke includes even more. It's only in the Gospel of John that we get, for instance, doubting Thomas, which is the latest Gospel, canonical Gospel, I should say.
Having no
That's
hands
where that
sucks,
arises. And in
though.
fact, the story of doubting Thomas, famously, he doesn't believe that it's the risen Christ. And Jesus says, "Come and touch my wounds." And he touches his wounds and he says, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus says, "You believe because you've seen. Blessed are those who believe without seeing." So in my view, what we have is this so-called mythological development of no post-resurrection appearances, and as the time goes on, as we get further away from the source, the stories get more fantastical, ending in a moral lesson to believe without
evidence.
Seeing. Yes.
Yeah.
This to me does seem a little bit suspicious. So it is a fascinating mystery. Like something very strange happened on Easter morning, because how do we explain the fact that this man gets crucified by the Romans, and then people claim to see him after he died, and were willing to be put to death for that belief? Now, okay, maybe he didn't die. Unlikely, as they say, the Romans knew how to kill people, and supposedly, they check. And they go to break the legs of the other prisoners as they're taking them down from their crosses. They were taking them down sort of temporarily and they hadn't died yet, but when they go to break Jesus' legs, they realize he's already dead, which is why his legs don't get broken, and they stab him in the side with a stick to make sure that he's dead. I mean, like this was a very effective method of killing people, and they knew how to do it. So it's unlikely that he just somehow survived this.
Is that the guy that stabbed him with the spear and supposedly there's blood on the spear, or was this? Did he get stabbed?
Someone stabs him with a spear like after
Right.
after he's on the cross, and it's essentially to check he's dead. Okay, so likelihood is that he was
Cardinal
actually
versus
crucified.
Rush.
And
I think
then a
Rush
few days
is
later,
better
people are
here.
claiming to see him.
Because
maybe they're
Murlocs, and I can just
But
like...
then you don't tend to go to death for something you
Yeah.
know to be a lie. You're willing to be put to death for things that you think are true, that are false. But very rarely are people willing to die for beliefs that they don't actually believe themselves. That doesn't really happen. So they probably weren't lying. As maybe they were mistaken.
Fooled.
Yeah. Now, I've known you since about 2019, which is probably it will have been slightly longer than Jesus was with his disciples. But imagine spending every single day with this person, living with this person, eating with this person, and then you've only seen him a few days ago, and somehow imagine somebody managed to convince you that they were me. Even if I had a twin brother, they probably wouldn't be able to convince you that it was me. Or maybe they were hallucinating in groups. One of the earliest gospel New Testament sources is the letters of Paul, the earliest. And in one of those letters, Paul refers to Jesus having appeared to 500 people all at once. And in some of the Gospels, you get at least some group appearances, at least more than one person, and sometimes, groups of the 12, all seeing Jesus all at once. You don't get group hallucinations like that. And so it doesn't seem like they were mistaken either. And so if they're not mistaken, they're not making it up. What explains the fact that these people claimed to see him after he had died? And the Christian apologists will say that the only real plausible explanation is that he really did rise from the dead. Now, it's a interesting argument and it's quite powerful. However, my response has always been that this sort of process of elimination is very clever, and that's how it's usually run. But it can go the other way. I mean, imagine I were trying to prove that there was such thing as a group hallucination. I know it's extraordinary, but there was a group hallucination. And I tried to prove it by saying, well, what are the other explanations? Or maybe they lied. Well, they wouldn't do that because they wouldn't go to death. Or maybe a man rose from the dead, but come on, that doesn't happen. That breaks all the laws of physics. So the only remaining option is this. Kind of depends where you start. But it is weird. Something very strange seems to have happened on that morning.
I can see why philosophers go mad. Because you were able to simultaneously convince yourself of something and then convince yourself of the opposite and unconvince yourself of everything that you've believed.
Yeah, but that's. I think one of those famous quotes of Socrates is that the sign of wisdom in a man or something is the ability to entertain a belief without holding it or without becoming convinced by it or something like that. And I think it's something anybody can do if they want to. And it's why philosophers are so. People think that philosophers are better at doing this. I don't think that's true. I think they're just talking about stuff that's far less political, far less real, and so they're less likely to they're less likely to be offended at the prospect of considering the falsehood of their beliefs.
Maybe
until you get into religion, I suppose.
You definitely seem to be able to have an ability to drop into
Damn it,
and
missed
out
two.
of arguments on both sides of the same fence and play with ideas in a way that I think is rare and presumably a bit of a disposition, but also largely trained, because you can sit and convince ChatGPT that God exists, or try and turn me into a theist, and then stand on stage and do the exact opposite. I think that there's probably quite a lot to learn from how people who have spent a good bit of time playing with ideas in philosophy dispassionately have that separation between themselves and the idea and the belief and what it means to them and the emotion and kind of that whole like ambient mess.
Yeah, well, it's playing is a good word because it's fun. It's enjoyable. And that's why it's fun to talk about theory of knowledge, because who really cares? It doesn't it doesn't grow corn, as they say, or make corn, however you're supposed to say it. And and that's fine, because if it did, then it would certainly all get a bit serious, and it kind of really matters whether you get it right or wrong. Whereas here we're just sort of having fun, but
It
you can
does matter in
I
ethics.
don't know. I can kind of see why heretics would get burnt at the stake when religion had social power, because you become convinced that this is the source of meaning, this is the source of truth. Without it, we are nothing.
It's now being threatened.
And then it turns out that maybe there are actually some holes to poke here. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, you can't let them do that, because this is literally, societally calamitous. And
Yeah.
so, they end up getting burnt at the stake. That's what also annoys me. I mean, you mentioned earlier this recent resurgence in the idea that, we're all sort of balancing on Judeo-Christian values. Maybe kind of true in a sense, but it does kind of get on my nerves that after, I said this to Ben yesterday, that the history of religious persecution against the very developments that those religious groups now like to claim as their own, I think that religion has shown to be wrong on a number of things. I listed them yesterday: the position of women in society, the fate of homosexuals, at least practicing homosexuals, the position of the earth in relation to the sun, the age of both of those celestial bodies, wrong about the common evolutionary ancestry of all animals, including the human animal, wrong about the ownership of other human beings as private property, as is explicitly condoned not only in the Old Testament, but also in the New. And now, not only does religion religion fails to come to us with an apology and contrition and say, maybe we were wrong. It says, no, those things are ours all along. It says, yes, we may have shown the instruments of torture to Galileo because he suggested that the Earth might orbit the sun rather than the other way around. But hey, didn't you know that the scientific revolution is essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? Yes, the Old Testament gives you explicit instructions about exactly how to either buy or steal other human beings and keep them sometimes as your sexual property. But don't you know that the abolitionist movement is essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? Yes, I know that St. Paul says that man is the glory of God, but woman is the glory of man, and that I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over a man, rather she should remain silent, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. But don't you know that social justice movements are essentially Judeo-Christian in origin? Yes, we know about the stoning of homosexuals and the fact that even St. Paul says that they're not getting into heaven. But don't you know that the LGBT movement is essentially sort of riding on Judeo-Christian principles? It seems to me relatively offensive to the people who've managed to secure these developments against the very religious traditions that now like to claim them as their own.
Yeah, both cause and effect. It's like being punched in the face by somebody who then comes over and gives you a bandage for it.
Yes. I mean, people like to refer to, and this is, I'm sort of rehashing some of the stuff that I said yesterday here. It's sort of like people like to point out that the people who really got the scientific revolution going were often believers in God. Galileo believed in God. Newton believed in God. In fact, but people were fascinated to discover his diaries to find that he spent more time writing about theology than science.
Madman for the last 30 years doing alchemy, right?
Right. But here's the thing, right? Like and as I said yesterday, I don't claim that this is the case, but if it were true that science had undermined religion and Christianity, if it were the case that actually these things aren't compatible with each other, then when somebody says, well, that can't be the case because don't you know that the people who sort of founded the scientific revolution were religious? Well, what else would they have been if they hadn't yet invented the mechanism by which their beliefs would come to be undermined? It's like saying that it's amazing that the person who invented the motor car didn't own a motor car beforehand. You see what I'm saying? It's sort of, I don't know, it seems very strange to me. And it's very recently that the popularity of this has increased, as you say. I mean, you go back to the mid-noughties at the height of new atheism, and it was very popular to talk about how religion's sort of always getting in the way of science. And maybe that was a bit crude. But I think we're seeing an equally crude annexation of all of the beneficial social developments of the past 100 years as somehow necessarily standing upon the Judeo-Christian tradition, as if it couldn't have happened without them.
Is this a scrabbling for something to hold on to, given that the collapse of grand narratives has had some poor externalities over the last couple of years? Is it just mass cope?
I think so. I think that nihilism, as it were, carries with it the feeling of being naked. You sort of thrown off what were essentially optional clothes to reveal what was there all along. But when you actually face it to nature, it's embarrassing, it's scary, and you will do anything you can if you find yourself naked in public to find any clothes to put on, not just your old ones. Doesn't matter what clothes. Any clothes are better than no clothes. And this is what people are beginning to realize. And so they're scrambling for their old clothes again. And
trying to legitimate.
And yes, and trying to put them on. And that's why it's easy as well for people to go around poking holes in other people's clothes. It's very easy to do. But that's what the success of a movement like New Atheism consists in the fact that all they had to do was just tell other people why they're wrong. You only need to poke holes in other people's clothes. But if you need to like sew your own shirt, that gets a little more difficult. C.S. Lewis said that the purpose of philosophy is not the cutting down of forests, but the irrigation of deserts.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I've thought about this for a good while. The seductiveness of being a critic as opposed to being somebody that makes suggestions, and the lack of preparedness of anybody to put forward any proposals for anything. You know, it's easy for both sides accuse each other of being reactionary, right? The reactionary right, the reactionary left.
Yeah.
And ultimately, for instance, perfect example of this is in the world of dating and sort of mate selection in the mating market. Everybody can provide criticisms about what's going wrong, and almost nobody provides any actionable steps to improve it beyond something that is eliminative rather than additive, right? Like, well, if we could just stop doing this, then this would be fixed. It's like, I don't think that that's quite the way that it works. And there's another very unique protection mechanism that's given, which is it's very hard to criticize someone's criticism, or at least being a critic leaves you open to criticism way less than being a proposer.
Oh, yeah.
Right? If I put something forward, if I posit a potential solution, for you to be able to come back and say, well, this is shit, and this is shit, and this is shit, makes complete. It's very easy to do. Whereas for you to say, for me to critique what you did, and then for you to come back and go, well, actually this and this and this about, it's like, it kind of gets all a little bit abstract, and it's a few degrees removed from anything that feels real.
Yeah, Simon Cowell can't write a song.
Nice.
You know, like if the world was full of
Platinum.
Simon Cowells, then we'd end up with no music.
Gotcha.
Somebody's
Well,
got
that's
to
it for
do
today,
the
I think.
building here. You can't just be a critic. And this is what I think has been the reason for the success of the sort of anti-New Atheist stuff that we've been seeing recently. I mean, you'll have seen this. Even the New Atheists themselves sort of treat it like it's a dead animal, and in many ways it is. And I think it's got to do with the fact that, yeah, they've done a very good job of cutting down the central pillar of what has traditionally been the reason for people getting out of bed in the morning. And then when people are there saying, well, what do we put in its place?
Next?
They're like, see ya. You know, I'm out. And they go off and do different things. And what are people to do? And that's why...
Was it the job of the New Atheists to provide something to...
Well, maybe not. Some people are just good at diagnosing problems. Karl Marx is a good example. Karl Marx's diagnoses of the way the world works are fascinating to read and incredibly useful, even if you disagree with them. But obviously attempts to sort of build societies on those ideas alone have failed. Seems like you need something a little bit more. I just don't think it's true, the religion stuff, I mean. And so that's why I think we're seeing this, because people are beginning to realize that it probably isn't true. They can't quite get behind the truth claims, but they recognize that there's some utility in having other people believe that it is true. And I don't know where that leaves us, because in this discussion about whether religion is good or bad for society, I said yesterday, look, I will accept your premise wholesale that religion is good, maybe even necessary for society. What do you want me to do if I just don't think it's true? Am I just lie to my children, raise them believing something that I don't believe is the case because I think it will somehow be beneficial to society? I don't think it works like that. I don't think people can actually fool themselves. Sure, you can act as if God exists, and that's what someone like Peterson says that people do already, but ultimately, if you just say, well, I think that, it should just act like a Christian because it's good for me, then when push comes to shove and you really have to make a moral sacrifice, if you're not actually a Christian, you're probably not going to do the actually Christian thing.
Well, I wonder whether this is afforded to people because of the convenience and comfort of modern life. The fact that having to really, really put something on the line, it's mostly LARPing as, belief systems and, oh, I'll pick up that piece of trash and I will, give money to this person on the street.
Yes. Yeah, people have sort of forgotten. I mean,
It's like bourgeois religious belief.
It's so irregularly that we have to make genuine moral sacrifices of the kind that used to be commonplace throughout the history of humanity, that we've sort of forgotten our ability to do so. And I think that if you push people now, they recognize that they probably wouldn't make those sacrifices. Did you see the Mr. Beast poll where he asked, would you rather have like $1 million or like a random person on Earth dies or something like that if you press this button?
No.
And like, I think it might have been a majority of people, a slim majority, said they'd press that button. Yeah, kill someone random. I'll take $1 million. And I actually kind of believe them. I think they actually would. And people want to say that that's because we've lost, our belief in God. I don't know. Maybe I think a better explanation is just that, like you say, we've become too comfortable. And so when somebody says, in other words, like, oh, well, this must be due to decline in religion and the fact that we've forgotten our Judeo-Christian heritage. I mean, you'll probably hear that a lot from people that you might talk to on this podcast. They'll say something like that. Just think to yourself, like, is that really the best explanation? Is that the only explanation? Could it be something to do with the growth of technology? Could it be to do with something to do with the growth of comfort?
Truth be told, Mr. Beast's viewers are 13-year-olds who just meme. Not the most developed. $1 million, that's a very small amount for like most moral sacrifices that are really hefty. Your existential dread will still follow you even if you're a billionaire. Probably worsen.
Yeah.
And is it more likely to do with that? And maybe it's not the lack of religion that's causing the other stuff, but this other source that's causing both of those things.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot recently about stuff that is literally true but figuratively false, and figuratively true but literally false. And it kind of seems a little bit like the beliefs that you're talking about here. It may be comforting, increasing in happiness, adaptive to kind of act as if these things exist. The belief in free will, actually, believing in free will, or sorry, determinism generally is something that may be literally true, but figuratively false.
Yes.
And that's kind of where I've come to as an opinion with this, that largely it's through designed ignorance, that I just don't think about it that much.
Precisely the reason it evolved. That's why it exists as an illusion, because it does something for us. And that's fine. I've never had a problem saying that.
Like, I think people are mistaking phenomena and base intuitions, as is free will, with something akin to what can be an illusion. Basic intuitions and like basic phenomena that you'd think or you'd act or you'd choose. These are more primal than the logic that come about. The idea of how determinism is a strong case. Simplifying mathematics simplifying the world will never fully explain it. Full explanation means that we need to get to the bottom of the infinite number, which we will never get. Like Achilles never catching up to the turtle. When Achilles tries to run to the turtle and always gets to the half. He needs to run through half of the trajectory, then half, then half, then half, ad infinitum. That's one of the examples, the Zeno's example, that in my mind shows that mathematics does not do well in fully explaining anything that's phenomenal, like movement and free will. These are of a different category than, and like more relevant and more grounded, basic understanding than anything mathematics can come up with or physics can come up with is.
But when the sort of auspices under which I'm having a conversation with Ben Shapiro is that he made a video called The Atheist Delusion. And in that video, he says, like, look, you can't have free will without God. I say, yeah, I agree. You can't have free will without God. You just also can't have it with God. And he essentially says, like, well, you know, there's sort of a, I don't know how free will works, but it's sort of.
I'll actually write that in. 3 things I really dislike about Alex O'Connor or disagree with. Yeah, no one visits my Substack, whatever. Greetings, Tanel. I greet thee. Kuidas läheb? How art thee? Thou. How art thou, Tanelski? I will write this as my article. Ooh, Zakopane, Poland, nice. What gives? What's the reason? Like some sort of conference? What's the thing you're attending? Is it a big Tekken event? Also, that's not how art thou, that's where art thou. Important distinction. Oh, nice holiday. Cool. You should visit. You didn't see Bartosz. Bartosz is a cool dude. He was here recently. But yeah, I don't remember whether he's near Zakopane. Where is Zakopane? Like southern Poland or northern? South Wi-Fi and 5G sucks here. Ooh, that sucks. I'm pretty sure Bartosz is from southern Poland. I should ask Bartosz whether he can give you Wi-Fi. Yeah, I would have suggested Tekken, but with crappy Wi-Fi, Tekken, you should play Law. Or any character in Tekken 8, I guess. I played Tekken Tag 1 in the Krakow Pinball Museum yesterday. Ooh. Yeah. Pinball Museum. Is that like... There should be Tekken Pinball. There's Tekken Volleyball, there's Tekken Force, Tekken Tag, there should be Tekken Pinball. And you should be able to do electrics there. If you do an electric, then, I don't know, you'll have more frames. Wow, Stream Elements said hello to. That's insane. The speed and advancement of these bots is insane. Absolutely. Or did you do like um, like a command or something? Um, anyway, Shadow Doom XX hi, Jonty Joseph hi. Sorry, I was writing stuff. I haven't seen your names before. Are you new here? And Donald, there was the second Pachi something game, right? Pachi Tekken, not sure. There was Tekken Revolution, which was kind of an idiotic idea, but whatever. Cam hides part of the text, by the way. Okay. Cool. Let's put it into perspective. Cool. Anyway, also the category right now is Hearthstone. That's weird. Let's try to make it writing again. Anyway, Jonty, XX Shadow, how are you? What's up? Do you have anything you'd like to see here? Do you want me to juggle either in Tekken or like some object? I don't know. Anyway, I'm writing a article on how I disagree with Alex O'Connor. Like for the last couple of nights, I've been like listening to random bits he has on YouTube, and I disagree with a lot of stuff he has there. And most of it is stuff that I was Tonel. I was thinking of the pachinko game. Pachi is the clapping sound in Japanese. Ooh, I did not know that. Pachinko, I know. Pachi, I don't know. I know. What was the sound that Goku made, like the young Goku made in Dragon Ball, where he like groped someone? Like there's lots of sounds for that in Japanese, I guess. So, basic things. I disagree with Alex O'Connor. Free will. That's a basic one. This one I can't really put into like a short statement. Basically, reference in language. Let's try to do it like in a more neat way. I don't know. Should be a better way to explain this. What the hell? Okay. Why is it like this? Eish. Okay, that's a bit better. Also need to add reference to the Alex's videos that I'll find that later. Mm-hmm. How's game dev going? Good idea. Good question. So basically, what I need to do mostly is write stuff. So I'm trying to write stuff in the thing I think I do it. I have done it most in philosophy to get. This is my excuse. The actual game dev stuff, I need to just like focus on getting like a meeting in with the other guys because others are always busy. And the second thing I need to do, except like besides the three things I need to do mostly: get the meetings going again because everyone's busy. Second thing, get the art style thing going, which is kind of on a hold because like two artists I've talked with are doing the stuff, and I should be able to find some time to also do art better myself. But that's on the backdrop. And aside project management and art stuff, I think writing is the third thing. But I think when, like last discussed, then where I didn't have the system in place to actually put the writing in. I think that's a bit of a technical issue. I think from like strictly the writing quality perspective, I need to just do writing in whatever form, and then I'll get better at it, hopefully. For the game, I'm not sure whether we need like placeholder writing right now. I just need to evolve myself, I guess. Do-do-do. But yeah, I am curious how Jonty Joseph and XX Shadow Doom XX came here and managed to say hi. I also wonder how many minutes it took me to reply. Maybe 2, 3? I guess it's a failure if it's more than 1 minute or like more than 5 seconds. I don't know. If there's like no viewers usually. Anyway, wanted to write about this thing, I guess. What do you mean by actual one? Actual current experience. Don't need brackets here. In the situation, your brain is trained to first categorize its chair and conjure up sounds that have been ingrained into your memory tied to the sort of vision. You'd likely have more of a chair in your mind, but it's never this perfect entity or platonic ideal. Show you what I'd I'm gonna go and work on my game. Can't code right now, but can draw on my iPad. That's cool. Yeah, I would do that tomorrow maybe. I wonder if I can show the screen on my iPad on the stream. Anyway, if you're up for drawing together at like a cafe or something, let me know. I take my iPad with me and we'd go to like a park or something or like a cafe and we can just motivate each other to draw stuff, maybe, if we want that. Would be cool, I think. Four sides, three angles. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. My point is that Alex O'Connor has this idea that's very common in analytic philosophy, that meaning is from forms in language from reference. Like you have something actual that your statement references. If it doesn't, or like a mental image or something, if it doesn't reference it, if there doesn't exist anything that references, then it lacks meaning. But like, so his point is like, if you say a triangle with four tips, four ends, or whatever it's called in English, then that lacks meaning. But my point is that like meaning itself isn't like strictly linguistic, because like language philosophy has been like really relevant in the like 20th century, etc., and everyone's like caught up in it and just stuck in it. But meaning and all of like how language functions and how we function with the ideas we have is not built on some sort of axioms, some sort of mathematical ideas that we just I don't know, arrive at because they exist somewhere out there, and there like actually no such things as like pure mathematical ideas in our heads or anything. Square with one round corner. Yeah. That's another option. The point is that our meanings, in my opinion, are never binary. It's not like, oh, this is a triangle. This is not. No, you always have this experience that has like many different shapes all over, and never like anything that can be like a mathematical object. But like inside this experience, you can like describe lots of things as triangles. Like I can look at this and look. Ooh, I maybe just like in my head make a line throughout it and see like triangles in it or whatever. It's never that there's not like an actual referent. Like experience as a whole is always like a messy continuum of things. The meanings we ascribe to it are never like either there or not. That's my point. And for some reason, that's a really rare understanding in in philosophy in general. And I don't think I don't think I've heard a good rebuttal of this. Cunt. Where's the cunt? The right cunt? No, I didn't. Anyway, should I panhammer you, Donald? All good. Thanks for coming in and see you around. Also had a very smart ass reply to this at some point. I should have also written down the three things more quickly. One's free will, the other thing I disagreed with was the reference thing. There was one other thing I really disagreed with Alex Connor. Alex O'Connor. I should have written that down. Damn it. Get-here cases. Get-here cases are kind of pointless. Mhm. Mhm. Where does he talk about Gettier? Is it here? Is it here? Fine tune, Jesus, sexy paradox, free will, ethics, somewhere around here.
Something is wrong.
Mm. And we know that people seem to change what they rationally do based on how they're feeling. I mean, I don't know.
No BS, no questions.
No.
Also, maybe a little bit clunky, but this sort of sparks this type of affair called a Gettier case.
Here it is.
This sort of spark.
No, no, not. Let's share this thing. Um, It's not a claim. A justification for in the get your case is a condition, basically. A concept that forms condition of justification. The free will thing was around here somewhere. Jesus, go mad, must cope, fine tuned. Free will. Hey.
Every time that I talk about free will,
I think what he said about free will even shows that it's quite commonplace. But anyway, the reference thing was, I think, in a different video. Where is it? It's in this video.
Which is P, that thing is P. It kind of feels like you're just saying the same thing twice. It's like a tautology. P is P. That's not a rule. That's not some law that somewhere out there in the universe that's constraining my behavior. It's just kind of tautologically necessarily true. There's just no thing that exists which is P and not P at the same time. There's
It's all
just
of our
no
experience.
such thing.
Like,
Whenever we use
you
language,
can't
in order for it to be
ever.
meaningful, the words we speak, no such
This
thing.
this
Whenever we
sentence.
use
This sentence is
language and not P at
absurd.
the same time.
This sentence he will utter now. It's absolutely absurd to me.
There's just no such thing. Whenever we use language, in order for it to be meaningful,
Okay, wrong.
there's just
time.
no such thing. Whenever we use
54.
language and not P at the same time, there's just no such thing.
Okay. 8:54.
Whenever we use language, in order for it to be meaningful, the words we speak have to have some kind of referent. Even when we're talking about things that aren't.
No, it doesn't. Okay. I think I have my weirdly written response to Alex O'Connor's, might I say, faulty little bits of ideas that he holds very, very strongly. Yeah, free will, meaning comes from linguistic reference, maybe. That Kadir cases are profound. These things I contest fully, and would be fun to have a reply from Alex. Let's have a cool little picture here, maybe of Alex. Something cool. I can't use photos though. Maybe something tied to academic philosophy. In a whatchamacallit, ivory tower. Which is the most accurate representation of the ivory tower? I'll give this depiction a 9 out of 10 ivory towerness. Yay, picture. The lose your mind bit is a reference to what this guy just said. Why philosophers go mad.
I can see.
It's weird. Something very strange seems to have happened on that morning.
So here. Okay, I think I have this. I need to ask Alex how spicy this is. Oh, I didn't even need the avatar thing. I have my little square triangle. Cool. It's like I think Wittgenstein later with his like later Wittgenstein works baffled Russell, who was his teacher, with oh, like if this is true, then philosophy lacks the meaning we thought it would have. And then like, yeah, it does. It doesn't mean it lacks meaning fully, but it means that your project of philosophy is illusory, and I might say less relevant than you think. Do you have Cosmic Skeptic on Substack? Alex O'Connor Substack. Can I post a comment somewhere? What's the most relevant bit? Maybe under.
About things that aren't. So yeah, he has the minty and spicy dichotomy, which people dispute all the time. And I'm with the masses on this one. Wasn't too funny, my comment, but it's something. I hope he reacts.
that's it for today. See you around.